I actually promised myself I would never go into corporate world and never work in an office. That's going really well for me at the moment. As you can see. I had to say yes a few times when I wanted to say no to build that trust and credibility. My very early prompts were very rudimental and probably not very effective, but I still got a positive outcome. And I think from there it was just like a waterfall of how much I could use it. You would have asked me 6 months ago whether an AI tool of any sort would be able to be an effective coach. I would have laughed you out the room. Yeah. I think that's fundamentally shifting now. I feel overwhelmed. Probably when I open up LinkedIn and just get a wash of all these, you must be exploring agentic AI and all this kind of stuff. It's a lot. At the moment, it feels like learning can sometimes be that people are waiting to have development done to them. And what I want to do is put that back into their hands.
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, SoEnergy, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.
Henry, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Look, I know we've had many conversations over the years, and I'm really excited to finally get you on the record. So watch what you say.
On the record. Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah.
Look, one of the things that fascinated me looking at your career is just the number of disruptive, innovative companies you've been at, starting with Dyson and Graphcore, and now at Lucid Group, innovative company within the healthcare space. What have you learned from being around so much disruption?
Good question. I guess, not being too flippant, but how to manage or work within chaos to an extent. But I think being at the leading or bleeding edge of disruptive organisations has enabled me to be more agile in how I respond to requests or how agile I work, and being able to flex and adapt to the situation. I don't think I've ever worked for an organisation where I've been able to stick to a plan for 12 or 18 months solid. It tends to flex quite a lot. And so I've learned to be more adaptable in my approach, which is certainly helping me currently with all the disruption that's going on around sort of L&D more broadly. So I think, yeah, probably adaptability and how to handle chaos.
Is there anything that stands out in the culture of the organisation that, like, when you reflect back on now, like when you think about a Dyson and household name, everyone knows, is there anything that stands out about the culture?
Oof. So many. I think everything is so different. I also think what's interesting when I think back to a large organisation like Dyson, having worked there, and even the smaller organisations that I've worked in since, it's quite difficult to pinpoint a singular culture or a singular cultural trait. Actually, organisations, in my view, are made up of lots of microcultures that somewhat connect and interconnect, but often don't have one complete strand that sits through them. But I think one thing that would come through would be this sort of sense of freedom that people experience in those organisations to go out and explore and be curious, generally speaking. Yeah. And I think that's been really exciting for me. And in the learning space, working in organisations that's full of very curious people is a really exciting place to be, and actually is a fundamental element of good L&D practice, I would say. So that would be one thing that I would pinpoint. But more specific, to come back to my original point, actually lots of microcultures rather than one big culture in those organisations, I would say.
So today you're head of talent at Lucid Group. Early in your career, you started in learning and development, right?
Yeah.
How is that? Now, obviously, the remit you cover is a lot more broader. Do you think starting out in learning and development has helped in any way for that kind of head of talent role?
Yeah, I think so. So originally, I actually started out in outdoor education, so completely away from. And I actually promised myself I would never go into corporate world and never work in an office. That's going really well for me at the moment, as you can see. Completely different. But what was interesting there is that my entire focus of my early career was on experiential learning and trying to enable and provide experiences for people to learn from, as opposed to creating learning for people to learn from. That's been really interesting and a great foundation for where I see myself going now, which is more of a focus on broader talent management and development and talent acquisition as well. Learning and enabling development still sits at the core of what we do within my current role at Talent. And setting when we're hiring people, knowing that they're coming in with gaps and hiring for potential,
Right.
and then that feeding into our development plans and learning strategies going forward has been really helpful. So I think I can still have that broad view of talent built on the foundation of development as a focus, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. And do you think in that time, then learning and development has changed much? Is it the same as when you started out now?
It'd be really easy for me to say everything is completely different.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a reality in that. I think the reality is somewhere in the middle, which is, yes, there's a lot of disruption that has happened. Although some might say, and having just been to Learning Tech earlier in the year, which I know you were at as well, some might say that actually not enough has changed in the last 10 years, and actually we've remained fairly stagnant in the learning space. I think what has changed is the expectations of
Right.
learning and what learning brings to an organisation. I think the expectations, hopefully we are responding to it. I've certainly tried to. We're having to become much more strategic in our partnership to the business,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
aligning to business outcomes, as opposed to potentially previously or earlier in my career, there was a greater focus on consumption of content, compliance, learning, how much content can we get out there, instructor-led training. All of those elements, I would say, still that's why I say that not everything has shifted, because
Yeah.
all of those elements are still foundational and fundamental to what we do.
Yeah.
Compliance learning has its place. It needs to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And that is done well. It can drive some really positive behaviours in an organisation. But it's almost, I think what's changed is we've got those foundational elements, and then we're layering over tops of
Yeah.
expectations, skills-based learning, performance consulting. All of those things are adding on, which makes it quite a overwhelming place to work
Yeah.
within.
We're definitely seeing that, speaking to many L&D professionals. Definitely, there's a feeling that they're under more pressure than ever before. And it's a combination of factors of you got CEOs who've got FOMO around, they don't want to be left behind. They want to make sure they keep up with the level of innovation and disruption required. And then there's the employee workforce that have got the fear of becoming obsolete, FOBO, as the new one goes, FOBO.
I've not heard that.
And so they're a lot more demanding right now, both with managers and L&D, where they can't be learning for the sake of learning. They're like, I want to know how this learning is going to help me get the skills I need to be able to do my job and grow. And then you got the poor managers in the corner who are like, look, I've got a real demanding workforce right now, and I don't feel like I've been equipped to be able to support them in the best way. So we definitely sense that demand. And there's almost a kind of, what do I do? Because it almost feels like the old methods and approaches aren't fit. Do you think that's the case? Do you feel that we're like old approaches, you're having to find new ways of doing things? Or is it just more a case of doubling down on certain things that were working for you before?
I think this is going to sound really cliche. I think it's about being as intentional as possible with the choices or the decisions that you make around the types of intervention or approach that you deploy for a certain challenge. And I think it's Josh Burson that talks about falling in love with the problem. And I think there's a big part of me that lives by that philosophy. And I wouldn't like to put instructor-led training or digital learning, SCORM training or whatever learning in a box and drop it in the Thames.
Yeah.
Instead, it's about being intentional. That has its place, and I'm going to deploy it in the right way for the right people in the right context. So I think that for me would be where I would go with it, is being more intentional as opposed to completely fundamentally shifting, because there's also an element of we've got to be learner-centric in our approach.
Yeah.
And a lot of people talk about that.
Yeah.
And in reality, it's quite tricky.
Yeah.
But it comes back to falling in love with that problem. Part of falling in love with the problem is also understanding the individuals that you're designing for or supporting with their learning or development journey.
Yeah. And with like connecting learning to the business outcomes, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this or watching this who are not along going, I want to do that.
Yeah, me too.
And it is challenging, right? And there are various reasons for it, but I'd love to know kind of what are the things that you recognize that you probably need to change in the way you're approaching learning and development in order to be able to align it better with business outcomes? Were there things that you weren't doing before that you were like, I need to start doing this or start doing this better in order to be able to create that alignment?
I think there's two things that come to mind. One is having a seat at the table, and this is more fundamental. And I'm really lucky with the organisation I work for right now that we've got really great engagement with our senior stakeholders, our executive team, and actually we have an ongoing dialogue. So that would be one, having an ongoing dialogue with the decision makers in the organisation. That has been a fundamental shift for me, and probably something that I've learned in my most recent role. And the second part to it would be being ruthless in our prioritization. I think often I have previously got quite lost and maybe moved away from business outcomes or business objectives or focus of what is needed because I've been responding to the loudest voice in the organization. And so probably in my career, especially more recently, I've probably got slightly better at, I wouldn't say saying no,
Yeah.
but focusing on and saying yes to the right things,
Yeah.
and being able to play that back to the business. And whilst I said right at the start of our chat here today that it's about being agile and flexible,
Yeah.
there is also an element of having your plan and having your
Yeah.
focus and reminding people like this is where we said we were going, because it's very easy for people to say, well, now we want to go in this direction. So that's why that ongoing dialogue is important, and being adaptable is important, but equally having some form of structured plan for the year or for 6 months or whatever it is your horizon allows for is a good approach. And I think that's what I've certainly changed or adapted to. Yeah.
What does that kind of ongoing dialogue practically look like? Is that like having a weekly check-in with certain business stakeholders, or what does that look like?
This is where my role has been quite fortunate. My recent shift in my role has been different, and I think this is where the lines of L&D and where I think L&D can be quite challenging. I will answer your question, Elsa, I promise. Because I work within the space of talent acquisition,
Right.
I have much more regular operational connections with my stakeholders,
Right.
which I wasn't having in the L&D space, interestingly. And so I guess that's been helpful for me. So it'd be false of me to say anything different. That's what enables me to have those regular ongoing conversations, and I can tag on a broader conversation about talent development. Having said that, I think the ongoing dialogue comes from probably an acceptance of being back in an office space a little bit more as well, and just catching people for 5 minutes, not feeling like you have to set up a structured conversation. I wouldn't say I have weekly conversations. I wouldn't say I have weekly connections, but I certainly have ongoing dialogue through my business, through the business partners as well, the people partners. We have a really close relationship and connection there. But ad hoc conversations, either in an office or as and when is needed, I think I have those regular connections with my stakeholders, but certainly not a weekly standing meeting for me, because I think that they can become a bit stale in my experience. So actually, I'll reach out when it's needed, and I've
Being
built
intentional.
Exactly. There's a bit of an intentionality there. Yeah.
With saying no, I'm sure there's so many people can relate to this, like L&D or not L&D, but in particular in L&D, where there's still a sense of being reactive order takers and having different business stakeholders come in and say, I've diagnosed the problem, I know what the solution is, go get me this. And essentially it's like a glorified procurement function that goes out and procures. And so as easy as it is to say no, it's actually hard to be able to do that in practice. So what did you find you had to do to get to that point, to be able to say, no, it's the plan, this is how we're going to approach it?
I think I had to say yes a few times when I wanted to say no, to build that trust and credibility, to be able to then say, maybe there's a different way of doing this. Or actually, when I say, yes, but could we try this, and take people on a sort of incremental journey, and it's a specific example rather than being nebulous. That might be saying, somebody comes to me and says, I want an instructor-led training program. Okay, great. Why don't we add in some self-directed learning to bookend that instructor-led training? Try that, see what the impact is. The next time round, it's, okay, well, let's approach this from what problem are we trying to solve here, and what's the best intervention or set of interventions that's really going to enable positive behavioural change or shift in this skill. So I think it's about not being, it's easy for me to say no. I don't think I've ever said like hard no, maybe a couple of times, but generally it's yes and, or yes, have you thought about this? Yeah,
that's really powerful. And even in the language you were using there, right, it seems like you've really adapted the language you're using to engage with business stakeholders, right? It's less around the classic kind of course completions and enrollments, but actually you're trying to talk the language of their outcomes. Do you find that there is a kind of learning curve around the language you're going to use to get engagement and buy-in of wider business stakeholders?
I think I'm really fortunate at Lucid, where actually as an agency, we are generally focused on outcomes within the health sector. Speaking that language to my stakeholders makes sense. It's a common vernacular that we use. But I think often it's about taking people back one step, maybe to go forward three, in my experience. It's, have you actually thought about what you're trying to drive here? And for me, the fundamental question is, how are you going to measure success to get there? And that question often stumps people, and often you then got to use a coaching approach to take them on that journey, I would say. But generally speaking, I'm lucky in Lucid to have the ability to talk about outcomes with a receptive audience. I don't know whether that answers your question or
Yeah,
not.
no,
But,
actually, no. Changing track a bit.
Yeah, go on.
Has AI changed your job in any way?
has it changed my job?
Yeah.
I think has it changed my fundamental job? Yeah, I think it probably it's changed how productive I can be on a day-to-day basis as a practitioner in this space. It's also changing how I'm thinking about where I invest my time and where I encourage my team to invest their time as well, in terms of their development, their focus. So has it changed my job materially? Not yet. Is it going to? 100%. And I can see it changing significantly and dramatically. Yeah.
Can you remember your kind of first aha moment with AI where you're probably hearing a lot of people talk about it and you're like, oh, let me give it a go? And do you remember the moment where you thought, oh, wow, actually, this is quite incredible?
It's really unsexy, but yeah, I can think. I can't remember the initiative that I was launching, but there was a training initiative or a learning initiative that we were launching at some point. Must have been 2023, and I have had feedback in the past about the brevity of my communications and my written communications and how I can be a bit briefer and a bit more to the point. And so this whole new chat, I'd heard of AI and whatnot, having worked at Graphcore and worked in Dyson and whatnot, but the whole generative AI and the ability to engage with ChatGPT came around, and I jumped on it straight away, put some comms through the AI assistant or through ChatGPT and got this response back, and I was like, oh my word, that's incredible. Like the response rate, I think my very early prompts were very rudimental and probably not very effective, but I still got a positive outcome. And I think from there it was just like a waterfall of how much I could use it. Yeah. And I think I probably went through a phase of overuse of it actually,
Right.
and went to the point where I then got feedback that my communications were a bit lacking in soul, lacking in like human, like who is Henry, what's his tone? And so I had to pare it back a bit. So I think that's a little bit of the journey that I've been on, is again, not to hark on about intentionality, but like intentional use of a tool for the right application, and not like defaulting to ChatGPT or whatever other generative AI tool, but using it intentionally to go, I think this could help me to give me a starting place, or I think this could help me to refine something, but I'm still going to bring in my own human touch to it.
Yeah. And do you think using it a lot, did you find yourself losing a sense of kind of critical thinking or evaluation of response? Was it like, there's research coming out now where it's almost like the computer says yes or computer says no, you go with whatever it says, and our own sense of what is good is being eroded by just relying on what this intelligence system says. Did you find any of that?
I can see that. I
Yeah.
can definitely see that, the old copy and paste job from there. But I think where I've got to probably now more than I was in the early, I say early, it's only like a couple of years, isn't it? But when I first started using it, was that, I probably did lose a bit of critical thinking. What I would like to think now is that actually the time, not saving, but the productivity that it provides, the increased productivity that I have as a result of engaging with generative AI tools, enables me to be more critical in my thinking.
Right.
It gives me more thinking space to think, okay, how is this going to land? I'm not always thinking about specific words or language, and it gives me the options to pick from to be more critical in my thinking.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of a flip to it.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
can definitely see the trap that is like, computer says yes, copy and paste, thanks very much, job done.
You were saying 100% AI is going to change your job.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's 100%? And in what way do you think it's going to change? And do you see signs of that happening right now?
I think that we were talking a bit earlier actually about the Moderna example where they're merging the people team and the tech team, and I think that's going to become more and more, I don't know, but I suspect that it become more and more prevalent, where those two areas will start to come closer together. I'm already working really closely with my IT colleagues. I don't know whether they like it or not, but they've got me whether they like it or not. And so I think there's a fundamental shift happening just there. But I think the ability for the thing that's going to change, and we talked about it a second ago, learning is still to a greater or lesser extent a service and support function, or it's perceived as that. And I think to an extent it is. You're there to support people's learning and development. That's what we do. If the expectation of the learner, our client, is different, and they can get their answers elsewhere, if we don't go with them on that journey, or in fact lead them on that journey as well, we're going to get either left behind or forgotten about and become irrelevant. So for me, the bit that's going to change is that I have to stay as much as I possibly can ahead of the curve to ensure that I can help people and enable people to integrate AI into their work, be on the forefront of workforce planning adjustments that we might need to make as a result of AI efficiencies or whatever it might be. So I think those are the things that I'm going to have to learn. So from a personal development perspective, I feel like I need to stay much more ahead of the curve and much more centered on what's to come as opposed to what's already happened. And I think also fundamentally, my job shifts from being a content, or me and my team's focus shifts away from being content creation to how do we enable humans and AI to interface and interact? How do I reassure the people in our organisation that's a positive shift and enable that behavioural change to adopt these new tools, at the same time as making sure that those tools are set up for ease of access, for optimal usage effectively. So I think that's where L&D and where I see my role being a really critical part of that, but not by any sense like solely responsible for it. We've got to work really closely with other parts of the organisation as well to do that.
And do you see, there is a risk where if right now I can go to my preferred AI tool or the organisation's preferred AI tool and get the information I need, I'm searching less now and I get exactly the answer precisely that I need. Do you find there is a case where there might be an argument for, do we still need L&D as a profession, as a function?
No, there's an argument for that, right? I think that, and I suspect that argument will be being had in lots of different organisations. I think that if we don't adapt as L&D professionals and practitioners and functions, then those questions are easy to answer for organisations. We will become irrelevant. But if we do adapt and see our role as being somewhere in between or enabling people to interact with those in a safe and productive way, then I think we've got relevance, and I think we can actually create those tools or adapt those tools to best suit the needs of our people. And actually L&D practitioners that I've worked with for years and years, what we're great at is getting under the skin of what's going on in an organisation and the problems that people are trying to solve. And sometimes the problems that people don't recognise that they need solving. Actually, that's where I think we can add the greatest value. But in order to do that, we've got to be great at facilitating conversations. We've got to be great at critical thinking as an L&D professional to be able to really interrogate a problem and then identify where those solutions might come quickly. And I think that's where, for me, AI is really exciting, is the speed that we can bring those tools to reality. Whereas before it might be a 6 to 8 week lead time or whatever it might be on creating a SCORM file. You put it out and it's not relevant for anybody, or 50% of the audience that you're trying to engage with. Now it's, okay, I can adapt this tool. I can create 2 or 3 different duplicate approaches that's completely contextualized and relevant for the individual. And so that becomes really exciting. But in order to do that, I've got to have a seat at the table as an L&D professional. I've got to really understand what the problem is for my stakeholder. And I've also got to have a great understanding of what AI tools can and already do and have the potential to do as well moving forward.
Yeah, and that really resonates, because that's why this kind of reactive order taker position is never really, I found, it's never going to be effective. No. Because what you're dealing with there is almost the known unknowns, right? Anything I know I don't know, I can go and ask an AI tool or go find it myself. And I think the real value is in helping people find those unknown unknowns. I can search for the thing I know, but you telling me this is going to happen in the organization or in the macro world, and therefore you need to be developing skills A, B, and C. That's where you add value that I might not be able to get myself. And that kind of real organizational learning, rather than, oh yeah, you asked me for this course, so let me go get you that course, is probably the one where you just need to set up the tech infrastructure and tooling for someone to be able to service themselves 100%. Rather than your time being taken up there.
I think the only other build I would make to that, which is hopefully, and you might be coming to this, Nelson, but is how do we make an initial and early step and show positive intent? And actually, one of the things that I'm realising is that we've got SharePoint we use SharePoint at Lucid, for example, and have done in lots of different organisations, and it's where information goes to die. In my experience, there's a lot of content on there, and all of a sudden we've got the capability, and we've recently invested in Enterprise ChatGPT for the next 12 months, and what we'd like to explore is the ability to bring all of that content into a place where it's searchable for individuals. So that might not feel like L&D, but it's enablement. It's like, how do I get the information to people where it's easy for them to access? They can use natural language to search and all this kind of stuff. And from a starting place for an L&D professional, I'd say it's a really easy place to start. Obviously, you've got to have the parameters of having a safe space for us to share all that information and whatnot. But that for me has been not a revelation. We're not there yet, but that's where I'm exploring it as an initial step before we get into like Chazzy AI agents and all this kind of stuff, which we might never get to. But that's where my head's going.
It's interesting. We had Donald Taylor on one of our webinars recently, and he was sharing some of the insights from his AI and L&D work that he's been doing, and reinforced other bits of research, which is saying largely the use of AI and L&D right now has been to be more efficient and create more content faster. And that's always been problematic, because you could be fueling the very problem of overwhelming people with a lot of irrelevant content. And there's very little examples of where it's being really leveraged to be more effective as well as efficient and aligning it. And we've spoken about this, and we work with many organizations who've used AI to map and figure out their skills gaps and align learning to that.
Yeah.
What are you most excited by, right? Beyond the kind of efficiency gains that it's largely the low-hanging fruit, what are you excited in terms of the problems or challenges you may not have been able to solve or even prioritize before that you think you might be able to today or in a few months' time?
Today, if I've got time to do it. I think the bit that I'm most excited about is the ability to, and I know the technology exists, again, having the time to actually get on and do it is another thing, because there's a lot of overwhelm, which I know we can talk about, but the ability to create learning experiences that feel contextual to the individual, and where they can have a conversation with, whether that be a trained AI bot of some sort, or AI in some respects, an AI assistant of some sort, where they can ask questions of it, and it directs them through a process or through a workflow or through a journey that enables it to be the learning to be more contextualized, and for it to learn from that experience and develop from going forward. That's what I think. I'll probably not explain myself so well there, but that's what I'm excited to see, the evolution away from here's a piece of content, like it or lump it, to actually we've got an AI assistant that's got all of that content built into the back end, and someone can go in and they can ask questions of it, go through scenarios, be asked questions back to embed that learning and make it as experiential as possible. That's probably what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I know you've seen it, but one of the ones, obviously at HANA, we've got HANA Guru.
Yep.
We created a prompt guru, right? And so we fed in like organizational knowledge and broader best practices around writing incredible system prompts, etc. And I've been using it a lot. To what's been incredible is obviously you can ask questions around like, how should I improve this prompt?
Yeah.
But what was really fascinating was the practice scenarios where it would now give me, I want this output from an AI tool. Tell me what system prompt you would write, and to be able to be coached through that and get feedback. Was game changing. And it made me really appreciate, it's a tool we built, but like the experience itself of going, you would never been able to scale that level of experience. No. And you talk about like why coaching is effective and why mentoring is effective. It's always been very difficult to scale because of the human investment that goes into it. And just to be able to unlock this access, it was fascinating, like the endless possibilities. And we're talking about how we're now feeding in productivity data.
Nice.
And the fact that I can have a guru asking me, you've just had a one-to-one, do you want to reflect back on how you performed in that one-to-one?
Yeah, amazing.
And like having those reflective practices, it is incredible.
It feels like the Holy Grail, doesn't it? Because ultimately, I think where we've probably all been, I would say all, there's obviously people out there who are doing it far more advanced than I am. It has been very much an individual prompting and asking the questions, as opposed to using it as a chat function and having the bot or the guru or whatever it is asking you and taking you through that process. And I think that's where it's really exciting. My mindset has shifted quite a lot in the last few months, actually, around coaching with AI.
Yeah.
I think if you'd asked me 6 months ago whether an AI tool of any sort would be able to be an effective coach, I would have laughed you out of the room.
Yeah.
I think that's fundamentally shifting now. I think there's some caveats to put on that, but ultimately I can see some really exciting developments in how a coaching approach can be embedded into an AI tool. I think that's another area that I'm probably quite excited to explore further.
It touches on what you mentioned earlier, where you need to overcome your own conditioning almost. Like I find, I'd like to think I'm an open-minded person, but I realised I was having a conversation the other day where actually a L&D professional was telling me about how their daughter was asked for their phone and was using ChatGPT almost like a therapist, and had it on voice mode and was pouring her heart out and getting advice. And I've got to say, when I heard this story, I couldn't quite understand it, right? I can't see myself doing that yet. And it just challenges your own preconceptions around what you might think is possible now. And you might be sitting there going, no, I don't see myself having that type of conversation.
Yeah.
On the flip side, my dad in his late 70s, I introduced him to ChatGPT. He now loves it. He'll tell me where the other day I was telling ChatGPT off because it didn't give me exactly what I wanted. And you just realize once you get used to it and it becomes that almost companion that you're speaking to on a daily basis, you'll be surprised what you're willing to speak to him about. But what I do want to close off on, I know we were talking about this before we hit record, around feeling overwhelmed, right? I know we're in tech and sometimes, put hands up, you feel overwhelmed for the number of things that are coming out and you think, do I have to be playing with all of these tools? And it can be overwhelming. And so I'd love to hear from you, Henry, where for anyone else who's listening and going, I do feel overwhelmed. Like, I don't even know what I need to be doing here. What's your kind of one bit of start here, or try doing this to navigate this?
I want to start with, I feel overwhelmed on probably a weekly basis. I said to you earlier, probably a daily basis. That's probably an over-exaggeration. A weekly basis, I feel overwhelmed. Probably when I open up LinkedIn and just get a wash of all these, you must be exploring agentic AI and all this kind of stuff. It's a lot. For me, I think, to answer your question, fundamentally starting with a couple of areas. One is being, the mindset, starting out with your mindset. What I think you've got to be doing is being open-minded about what the possibilities are to using AI within your day-to-day practices. And then a starting place for doing that, ChatGPT, there are a couple of other tools out there that you can engage with. I'm sure you can find them. Just starting out with some minor prompts. I started using it for communications, as I said. How do I improve my communications? And taking a use case that you feel comfortable and safe with. Or is it about trying to improve some materials? I know we said about not trying to load more materials out into the world, but actually there's a really good starting place.
Yeah.
Build me a workshop overview or an agenda for a meeting or something like that. Those are really safe spaces to start, I would say. But recognizing that it is overwhelming and there's a lot going on, and being okay with the fact that you are where you are in your journey, I think is where the last piece of advice I would leave is, don't give yourself such a hard time, but also engage with other people in the L&D space to normalize how you're feeling. For me, especially in the last couple of years, building my network out, engaging with other L&D professionals has been really helpful for me to reassure myself of where I'm at on my journey. I think there's a lot of information out there. There's also a lot of people saying, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. And it's like, where do I start? What do I start with then? How do I do this? And the best way to do that is connecting with other L&D professionals. That's probably where I would land with that question. Yeah.
Henry, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers,
Thank
Nelson.
you.
Cheers, mate.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, SoEnergy, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.